We've been in the banking business in Monmouth since 1870, and I was the fifth generation to be in the bank.
So how did they get here?
Okay, that's what Joseph Harding, with a G, Harding, came from Northampton, England to New England in 1623. He was apparently a mariner and did fishing, and that's what he did for a living. He had children who had children who had children, and by about 1860 or so, they think that he had about 700 descendants. But in any event, there was one descendant, 6 generations down, was Chauncey Harding. Chauncey was born in Connecticut, but he moved to New York State, and he had 2 sons born in New York State, which was in Otsego County, New York. I believe they farmed. My great-great-grandfather was one of those sons. The 2 were Harry G. and Chauncey. Chauncey was my great-great-grandfather. Chauncey, at the age of 21, clerked in a store. He got bored for the first 6 months. The second 6 months, he got bored and $10 a month. And at the end of that 6 months, he started receiving $35 a month. But after a couple of years of that, he decided to move west and to seek to better himself. So he came by way of the Great Lakes to Chicago, and then from Chicago down to Monmouth by wagon. The entire trip took about 3 weeks. He arrived in Illinois on July 4th, 1840. Once here, he sent back for his fiancée, and she arrived in August, and they were married. He started clerking again in a store in Monmouth for $35 a month. After several years of clerking, he and his wife moved to a farm in Tompkins Township. It was a 640-acre farm. He had acquired a part of that acreage and was leasing the rest. They farmed there for 7.5 years. At the end of that time, they sold 640 acres. I assume it was that same 640 that they were farming, and moved back into town in Monmouth. In 1853, in partnership with Judge Ivory Quimby and Grandpa Chauncey's first cousin, General A.C. Harding, the 3 of them built the railroad from Burlington to Knoxville. Since they knew where the road was going, they acquired all the land along the route. The railroad, they operated after they got it built for about 6 months, and then sold it to the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, which is now the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. they were reputed to have made about $1 million apiece on this venture. One of the keys to the venture was the acquisition of all of that land along the right-of-way. So they really were real estate investors at that point. They laid out the south addition to the city of Monmouth, which the railroad goes through. And in addition to that, they laid out Kirkwood and Biggsville. Following that venture, Grandpa Chansey and his two sons, Delavan S. Harding and DeWitt, both of them, or all three of them, then got into the hardware business in Monmouth. And they operated a hardware store here for, in the neighborhood of 7 years. In the meantime, Grandpa Chansey's brother, Harry G., didn't come from New York until about 1857, but once he got here, he, along with General A.C. Harding, their first cousin, purchased a 40-acre tract adjoining Monmouth and laid out Haley's addition to the city of Monmouth. Again, developing the real estate. In about 1870, Grandpa Chansey decided to start some banks. He started two in Minnesota. Several years later, one in Iowa, and several years after that, another in Minnesota. But also back in 1870, he, along with several others, organized the Monmouth National Bank. Grandpa Chansey was a vice president of that bank. However, I think that it's important to point out that initially the first several generations that were in the banking business were really officers of the banks, but they were not operating the banks. I've never pursued to find out what happened to the banks in the other states, but the Monmouth National Bank, Grandpa Chansey sold his stock in the Monmouth National Bank to George F. Harding, who was the son of General A.C. Harding. And at that time, Grandpa Chansey and his brother Harry G. organized the Second National Bank of Monmouth. Once again, they were officers of that bank.